something by me now. Right. This is another piece that's going to be on that Autumn Records release, that the first piece you heard when you came in is going to be with. This is a piece I wrote for Arraymusic, so you'll be hearing Arraymusic, including having the then conductor Henry Kacharzik playing electric piano. So it's 2 vibraphones, electric piano, acoustic piano, clarinet, violin, string bass. And then added to that is the draperies, who includes the illustrious Ryan Driver, who's in our midst, singing and playing the analog synth, and Eric Schnoe singing and playing guitar, and Doug Kelly singing and playing trombone, but not at the same time. And I'm playing melodica. And I think we're going to listen to a bunch of this. We're not going to listen to it all. The whole thing's about 40 minutes, but we're going to listen to a bunch of it and then talk about it in light of what we have been talking about.
Remind me of the name of that piece.
It's called Tamlin Drapery. That's just, I guess, just under 2/3 of it. There's about another 17 minutes left. It turns out fine. Tamlin does not turn out to be an elfin grey. He was a human. She's pregnant by him, but she rescues him from the Queen of Fairies, turns back into a human, and they live happily ever after. So, didn't want to leave you hanging. It's a Scottish muckle ballad, which means big ballad. That also has kind of a currency in the British folk revival, like from everyone from A.L. Lloyd to I guess the most famous one being Fairport Convention, doing a rockin' version of it with different tunes. That's the other thing about folk music; it all has different tunes. I'm kind of interested to know what you make of that. But rather than just put you on the spot that way, if you were, pardon me?
We'll do an audience.
Yeah, that's right. Random pointing. Like for those of you who don't actually know how that was made, would you know how that's made?
How it's recorded?
No, if you're going to describe what you were listening to, if someone said you just heard this long piece, they said, what was it like? What would you say?
Combination of composed and improvised.
That was a combination of composed and improvised, which certainly on a level it is, yeah. Well, maybe I won't be coy. I'll just tell you about it. I was asked to do a piece for, I think it was the second Scratch Festival that Array did. Was actually asked to do a concert, and I decided I would do it with. I would only do it if we got to include the draperies. Doug and Ryan and Eric, who, I mean, they do all kinds of things. They're master songwriters and crazy singers and great rockers and folkers and jazzers, you name it, they can do anything. But as the draperies, they would freely improvise, and sometimes they'd let me freely improvise with them as well. So I know I wanted them, and I knew I didn't really want Arraymusic to freely improvise. No offense. But I knew I wanted to make a piece, and so for me the question became is how could I do that without it just seeming like, you know, here's the improv guys and here's the, you know, notated music folks. And the first thing that dawned on me was that one way around that whole dialectic, as phony as I think it is in a lot of ways, was to write a song, which I don't normally do. But I thought, hey, what's the form within the culture that people still hear as a thing, but kind of absorb anything? Like when you think of the whole world of song, you're talking about such wildly diverse music. But people would still say, "Oh yeah, that's a song." I mean, they might go on after that, but basically this idea that you have people singing a text, you know, it absorbs a lot of things. Like, I mean, because, you know, every Burt Bacharach song with Dionne Warwick singing it is also a combination of composition and improvisation. But you don't really think about it that way, right? You don't really think about what are the parts and who's just blowing an obligato and how much of the drum part was written for Hal David and stuff. Like, you just don't think that way. It's a song. Then I also, because I love British folk music, I decided, because I can't write songs, I would use traditional lyric. And I chose this one though, just because it had a history of being done with such different tunes in such different ways too, for people who cared about that as well. I tried to write a tune that would, well, I sort of decided that it was going to be someplace between
some odd idea of folk music I have, and then my other love lounge music. So I then decided I'd write a new tune for it. And I wanted to have a tune that would both absorb some folkishness, but also pitch-wise be able to absorb a lot of lounge jazz changes as well. So that was all happening. And then the next thing, though, was to actually think about, in terms of composing and this idea of this sort of swimmy texture, what are all the tools I have in terms of making that kind of sound? So the way the piece was written is I made one group of array people do what they do unbelievably well. I mean, some of these people are also great improvisers, but there's a notated part for the violin, clarinet, acoustic piano, and string bass. And it's all written. It's all like a lot of other music I've written, this sort of snaky polyphony. And it was written completely separately from thinking about any of the other music. I think the part I composed is about maybe a minute and a half long. It's this much. Then what I did. Yeah, that's crazy. I basically used the same rhythm that I wrote in this 1 minute and a half of music, but there's different pitches that go with it, and that has a whole other system. But the thing that they do, which is they did like insanely well, and it flummoxes me, but they slow down slowly over this many pages. Like basically, the rhythm in these 3 pages, when you read these 3, each beat is now counted at the tempo of a beat plus a 16th note. So what you have, so if your beat is going towards the end of it, Bob the clarinet player has to start thinking of a beat that goes and that becomes like basically 5/16 make the beat. That becomes a new slow tempo, and then you keep doing that. So basically, by the time you're at the end of this, I mean, I have to notate it differently, but it's the same rhythm. It took a minute and a half, takes about 12 minutes to get through a cycle. And so they're doing that, and they're that's all they're thinking about is how to stay coordinated at this tempo. The other thing I realized that I had a lot of experience with was music that had chord changes. So the other notated part was this, the melody line, and then places where the draperies don't sing, but with these endless chord changes. And they were slightly ramped up. The way I did it, it was all kind of major 7, minor 7 chords, but it was always 2 of those chords, a tone or a semitone apart. So you have D major 7 over C major 7, C sharp minor 7 over B minor 7, A major 7 over G major 7. And the way that works is the 2 vibraphone players and the electric piano are playing the chord changes basically in time at a quarter note equals 69. And there's a different number of bars that go for a chord change. The electric piano just always plays the downbeat of the chord change and only does that, but that lets the vibes players know that the chord has changed. I just divided it like one vibes player would be playing the D major 7, C sharp minor 7, A major 7. The other one would be doing the second change. But they had instructions that within within the chord change, they were allowed to make 3 attacks within that period of time. So they're more or less dense, depending on whether the chord changes are faster or slower. But so they're sort of improvising, but they're also playing the chord changes and also keeping the singing coordinated with that beat. And then the last thing was with the Draperies, who I played with a lot, I mean, they have to sing the tune, which is all notated. Although Ryan and Eric improvised the harmonization, which completely floors me. I have no idea how you hold harmony with all that other crap going around you, but you can talk to Ryan about that anyways. But beyond that, we just improvise. And I mean, I would play the tune with them on melodica, and after that, it was just completely free. Except, again, like I think this is where I'm kind of coming to in terms of what's possible. Like from the standpoint of an academic composer, I would never send this score out and say choose 3 people and have them do whatever they want. It has nothing to do with that. It was writing for those 3 people. Specifically, I mean, it had to do with, you know, discussions we've had. I mean, Eric and I especially talk a lot about this, but with improvising, that you try and improvise in a way that people don't hear you hearing each other. That you play as if it's a vernacular music, and it just goes. Because, you know, I'm obviously very fond of music that just sort of starts and has a lot of detail but continues. So it's not about a lot of architecture, and because I knew they could all improvise that way, I could just say, well, do whatever you want, and to myself as well. But I mean, so the whole idea was that you had all these different things going within this kind of extrapolated pitch world, but that you hopefully though couldn't always tell, you know, who was doing what and why and things like that, you know, with a lot of the idea being that it could take advantage of everything that I had learned both in the classical academy and playing, you know, jazz and pop music and improvising, and you know, that it could be something that hopefully wouldn't even sound particularly hybrid as much as just its own beastie. Part of the other things I did bring in, I just wanted to sort of append this in terms of you know, talking about what I was able to do because of you know, how I improvised with Eric and Ryan and Doug, was that I mean, you know, there can be a lot of discussion around improvisation and composition, and to me it's really a red herring. I mean, it's not to say that you don't come up with different results from you know, putting things on a page, which for me is actually a thing about, like, as opposed to the text. I don't put things on a page so that I can really pin them down. I put things on the page because I can just say, okay, I'm going to do this for way too long and not think about anything. Like, I tend to compose with either the TV or the stereo going because I'm not trying to pin it down. Like, once I've made certain choices, I just kind of, it's like I'm knitting or something. Like I'm much more self-conscious when I'm improvising in terms of how's it going. Like, am I doing a good thing? You know, all of that stuff. So it's like that whole idea that composition is about you know, getting it right, and that kind of control isn't how it works with me anyways. But it's also, for me, for all the differences in you know, even within something like free improvisation, it's just in this broad sense I've been talking about. Those to me are also like those differences are in a sense compositional decisions that I think for people who think about how you make music can be opened up to discussion. Like, for instance, there's a lot of free improv that one can hear that is actually based on a metaphor of dialogue and multiple people doing stuff together. That's actually a compositional decision, and not only that, it sounds like it. You'll hear the I mean, it's the classic thing. You'll hear the people sort of feeling each other out, and you'll get inevitable crescendos as they find agreements and that. But there's still a metaphor and a reification there that's about dialogue and a certain kind of metaphor of ethics. Again, the great news is that wonderful music can come out of that. That it's not actually that metaphor, or that reification is like, oh wow, they don't know what they're doing and they're trying to find a way to converse, doesn't actually guarantee that the music can't be completely other and all of those things that aren't transcendent but sound like it. But that, you know, can still have that irreducible strangeness. So like again, the reification doesn't do that. But I mean, I think the big thing though is that music should be talked about in a sense compositionally. You've made a compositional decision that how free improv goes has to do with this conversation, this back and forth, and that in a sense rationalizes a lot of its formal structure. The thing that's with these groups, for instance, like Vibrant Cathedral Orchestra and No Neck Blues Band, the reason I brought them is, even though it's free improvisation for very different reasons, but ideologically, they just make sure they start. They just go. I mean, it's not to say that there aren't ebbs and flows, especially with No Neck, but you have no idea why they're happening. They don't sound like people building to climaxes and excitement. It's just the most goofy and knowable music. And then when they put out their CDs, they just cut things in the middle, slap them in there, still leave them as 4-minute tunes. So you don't hear even maybe a lot of the feeling out process that you might live, but it's also free improv, but it just doesn't have anything to do with this idea of representing dialogue. And it's not better for that. It's just utterly different. And I think to me that's more the discourse that maybe thinking compositionally in that broad sense, like basically what is it that's being put into the air? What's its links to culture? What's its history? What are its little micrological threads it's pulling on? But like, hopefully is it wonderful for one as, for me as a listener, without it having to be agreed on. It's not a language. We don't all have to like it, or forget even like it. We just don't have to have the same experience. But there's still a lot to talk about in terms of how those formal decisions actually have a history and a way that can initially shape listening, but hopefully not overpower it. Any questions? Yeah.
You want some responses now?
Yeah.
That's a piece I've heard through at least twice, and I love that piece. I think it's a great piece. But I think your theory works very well for that piece in love you're composing, up to a certain point, at least. But I think if you look at it as a theory of art in general, you're making a lot of two-way streets into one-way streets, in the sense that you're talking about how you try to arrange the world to keep your perception and your action fresh, so that you avoid anything that's prepackaged, reified as you say it. But I think globally, art is just as much about making concepts as transcending concepts, and that language doesn't have a special role there. You talk about discussing things as reifying, which can be, of course, the case. But see, if you took your presentation here and made it into a nice scholarly article, then it would really be reified. This rambling thing that you've done puts us in contact with you, right? It's a great mediator. It's almost like we can feel the thought process happening, which would disappear if it got reified into a neat philosophical article. And some clarity would be gained, some communication would be lost. It might turn out to be great, or it might turn out to be boring, I don't know. I've never seen you write that kind of a short article, so I don't have any idea any way to predict that. But I think also, I don't know those particular cave paintings. I know some other cave paintings. But one can look at them as concept making or as concept transcending. I think, look at Michelangelo's David. Also, there's a concept of David as being made, but but the minute you look at it, you're seeing a whole story that isn't there. It's also transcending the concept. So you, and in your writing and in some kinds of abstract expressionist painting, one really is trying to maintain a position that's very much on the edge avoiding concepts, but I don't think that's the general situation of art.
Yeah, I
And
guess.
I think, I think even in your piece, one has to appreciate that there is a dynamic of emerging coherence that slips away. And the process of letting coherence emerge is just as important as letting it slip away.
Yeah, I guess though, in that respect, though, I think I kind of failed in terms of the importance of that Adorno quote, because for me the point is to actually the real thing to try and avoid is that dialectic, like the I mean, and what's is thorny about it, and you're saying it because I mean there's how you make the thing or how you imagine making things, and then this broader thinking about art. But like for me, the significance of the Adorno quote was that no, like when art happens, something is being unreified, and it doesn't matter what we're talking about, whether it's a folk song or Bacharach or Beethoven. It's moot that in terms of what the art experience is. So basically, that's available with all kinds of experience, even if they're not called art. I mean, there's I guess in another problematic statement, but aesthetic experience available with all kinds of things, perceptual things in life. So for me, I feel like, I mean, that's that. After that, though, like given that, whether something is concept producing or what was the other word you used? Transcendent. It's that comes after the after this broader thing that art at its core is a non-reifying thing. I mean, it like basically the concepts that go into making art in terms of methodology and ideology aren't the art, and not only that, it's almost by definition that would be philosophy, for instance. That's not to say that there aren't like a kind of thinking inherent in a piece, but it's a different kind of thinking than, and I don't mean thinking, I don't mean technical thinking. There's a kind of way of desiring it and wanting the experience that's still thought, but it's different than either science or organized philosophy.
What Deleuze would call it, percepts instead of concepts, as a way of distinguishing.
Yeah, like that's another. But yeah, so where are we here? The I guess the point is though is I'm not actually looking for a piece like that to be that much different than something more familiar though too, like or I don't want it to be heard strictly on the level of what it's referencing and critiquing. Like to me the real key though is to like that's why I think Adorno called the methodological things of thinking about history and culture and all of those things as micrologies. I mean they're in a sense minor and little compared to the larger adventure of taking part in art. The flip side of it is you're never away from the history of that. You're never away from the local culture and social grounding of that. So, I mean, that was what I was saying though too. Is that, like I don't think I'm not recommending for a second that everyone go think like this now about what they do, because then they're going to make good non-reifiable art. I mean that would be rubbish, and that's every bit as reifiable, or we're sort of doing it now in a way as the Carpenters as well. But it's for me, I guess maybe the key more than. Yeah, and I'm sorry it sounds like I made a one-way street out of it. That if I was going to make an article, I would try and have that not be that way. Because for me, the real point is that with reification, is like it's not that you. It's a non-dialectical idea, because if you just say it's the other, then that's reified too. Like basically, basically you're hoping for a situation, regardless of whether you're a maker or not, where the irreducible strangeness of the thing doesn't go away. The big thing though is that how that ebbs and flows, and maybe even what its kind of social valencies are, have a lot to do with how you talk about it. So like if you're talking about otherness, saying transcendent has a very different politics than saying irreducible strangeness, which has a really different one than, you know, fucking weird. And like, but it, like, they might be still pointing at the same thing. Or I mean, we went through a habit with works like that we really like calling them like, that was really dumb. That, like, basically it was just like, you'd just think of the word that had the opposite valency of what you'd mean, and you'd say it just as, you know, and it wasn't that you really thought it was dumb. You just were thinking from any word to say other than great, even though you were still like going like, so, and I mean, and that wasn't more correct either. But I think for me, that's more the issue is that how you talk and think about these things will affect what you do, but not on a better or worse level.
I was glad you mentioned the word politics, because I get what you're saying with this idea of a kind of, when you're talking about thinking compositionally, I'm hearing you say something like a sort of affective or presensorial social historical awareness with an end game of ambivalence of some sort, right? I mean,
yeah, that's maybe a little more systematic than I'm comfortable with, but I guess I did say something like that.
Okay.
Sure. Damn it.
Well, I was wondering, because I've met Rudolph a few times,
Yeah.
and he's, of course, an amazing man. And you were talking about the non-hierarchical aspect of this, but there is a politics. And when I've spoken with Rudolph, I'm always amazed at, you know, if you get him talking about Mozart, I'm sure you know, all of a sudden there are hierarchies, right? It's like Mozart is shit. If you get him talking about a certain group of canonical composers.
Yeah, although one of the movements of the Jupiter Symphony is the top of the golden ladder. He said that one to me too. That was the other gobsmacking thing. The guy who can write that music said, whatever movement it was of Jupiter Symphony here, John Coltrane here. It's like, what? what do you mean? but he still can write that great music.
What is the kind of value, direction, or politics of thinking compositionally? You know what you're talking about.
I guess.
Or why isn't Britney Spears included in the?
What? I mean, you could. I think the big thing, maybe it would even be so that, I mean, because I've been using shorthands too, but I guess for me it has a bunch of things in it, and it's, you know, Deleuze does talk about this a lot since he's in there, he's interested in ways of thinking that stop thought in terms of his definition of thought. What he's interested, what to him thought is only as good as its ability to create movement, because he actually believes there's hope when people don't actually say something is this and something is that. And he has that whole interview with Claire Parnay where he's hating the word is and the verb to be. What he's interested in is connectors. It's all about and this and that and this and that. And to him, that's where there's hope for some kind of or some kind of less social misery, anyways, as things move. And I guess for me, but that doesn't mean that you just go and that, and the light and that. I mean, you're still maybe from the cannibals thing, you're still eating things in, but rather than trying to come up with solutions, I mean, I guess what does seem politically significant to me is that people don't get self-satisfied ideologically and saying this is how it is, and it stays there, and also that they don't listen to things emblematically. So for me, what's interesting is that I don't there is no Britney Spears that really breaks my brain, but there's some Britney Spears that's way more insidiously, you know, viral in terms of changing mind than others. And there's like drum breaks in those songs that really do wow me. So it's actually, I guess part of what I'm thinking is trying to be in a situation where you're so voracious about what you're taking in that you don't just go Britney Spears and think that that's a sensible statement to make. like, do you mean her bass player? Do you like just Britney Spears? That sounds really different because like, and you could even go that way too. So to me, the politics is still this thing where yeah, I guess it's a disbelief in a certain kind of static thinking and maybe erroneously though, but holding out some hope around like celebrating like difference, not something against something, but just and not even newness, just difference, just kind of, again, maybe a kind of fluid stuff that allows you to be in touch with experience with others, as opposed to telling them what something is or not. I mean, I know that sounds very highfalutin. I guess it's the you can take the prairie boy out of the charismatic Christianity, but you can't take the anyways, or something like that. But it's very hard for me not to preach, and I think I fail discursively because of it often. But there's something like that's going on, I think, for me politically. Does that? To me, there is that, and it's with the cannibalism thing too. It's that larger part of larger thing of taking part, where the difference between taking something in and doing something is kind of in terms of the normal dialectic, like, oh, I made that piece, as opposed to, oh, I listened to that piece, where that stuff breaks down, and they're all, a lot of it's radiations of a much more complicated or complex, I guess is the right word, activity. I feel like I'm in trouble, but people aren't saying anything. I'm gonna get a bad mark. Does anyone have anything else? I mean, I guess we've. Yeah.
It's fairly mundane after the conversation we've just been having, but I was curious about the long form of the piece you played of yours, and it was intriguing for me when you were talking about the monkeys and playing the single over and over. You made a link there that I'd never made in my mind before, or a possible link between 45 RPM single and long form trance pieces or whatever. But I found, listening to your piece there, I guess I got to the point where I thought I'd seen the Buffaloes, and I was just curious to know your kind of compositional decision, your decision-making process that takes you to a form that is that long. So maybe I'm a bad person with a short attention span. I don't know, but it was just
No. I think it in a way it. I mean, I think initially there was a kind of a residual from being classically trained, where you were just used to really long things, but they were rationalized around narrative. But I mean, so there was. I mean, to me, Mahler is long, in a way that this isn't. But I mean, I listened to Mahler, so like. So I mean, there is sort of like the brute habit thing, but I think though it is sort of, first of all, everything I write isn't that long, but I think part of it was in terms of the kind of things I was bringing together. I thought that the length, in a sense, would absorb thinking you got it in terms of its unorthodoxy. So it's like, oh, okay, yeah, that. It's probably improv, and that sounds like where it does sort of work together, and it's not really about boredom, but that basically trying to, like, it would be long enough that because there is that part of that music as a language reification that I think is still always there for this culture, where you also think you're supposed to get a piece of work, like you're supposed to somehow understand it or grasp it, or all of those kind of language-based words, like, oh, I get it, oh, I understand it, or that made sense to me, or that was coherent, like words that have to do with like interpretation. And I guess I was interested, given how much stuff I had going on, wanting to allow it to just sort of go long enough so that people wouldn't be thinking that way. And
that's exactly the response I was trying to avoid in myself, to say, okay, I've got this now. I think I've kind of figured out what's going on. I've got the rhythm of the piece. I've got the. But I was finding it difficult just because of length. And when you said another 17.
Yeah.
Minutes, yeah. And I just,
You didn't want to know how the story ended? Oh, you knew that. Yeah, that's right.
thanks for that.
Oh, and you're Scottish, so you knew already, right? Surely. Yeah, well, I mean, I have people who often enjoy my music who find that, like, turn that off regularly too. I mean, I guess for me that's how I was actually thinking about it with this one is that by choosing a long song, I knew it was going to be long. There is that thing I was talking about, but I also thought, okay, I'm going to go with that. And then it was also, though, trying to think of proportions where you weren't expecting things. So how long are the more improvised breaks, for instance, for the singers and stuff like that? And what I would say, and I mean, this is something I really like, is that I don't always stay in that listening experience too. I turn this piece off a lot. I try and fast forward it so I don't hear the same bits all the time. But there is that thing that I do like with it too, that other times when I have left it on, my attention will drift, and then something will catch it, and I'll go, whoa. I mean, it's not that it's not even that it surprises me, because it's not. I do know it that well now, but I just haven't heard it the same way, or that wasn't where my attention came back, and then it'll change how the rest of it goes. But
Sorry, am I hogging?
no, I'm pretty interested in
I
this.
think for me it was actually we really are dealing with a whole bunch of intersecting or colliding conventions here, and to actually be sitting statically listening to a piece like that as if we were in a pseudo concert hall was one of the things I was finding difficult. It would seem to me to be much more a piece to experience in some way, like an ambulatory piece or something where you would dip in and dip back out, and kind of listening experience you're describing for yourself. But I don't know quite how you would achieve that. It was very curious, I found, to just be front and center, focused. I don't know. I mean, these are vague thoughts.
Yeah, no, I mean that though might just also be. I mean, there is something around habit involved in that, but I mean, there's lots of music way longer than this in terms of even just sitting and listening to your stereo. Forget a concert hall. I mean, that's not a defense of it. It's just that I think. I mean, for instance, I will never go to another Morton Feldman concert of the late works. I mean, I've listened to a lot of them now, and they were great experiences. I still play those works at home, but I get so unbelievably uncomfortable in most seating doing that. I find it impossible. But I have close friends who get aghast when I say things like that, because.
Well, he was in favor of walking in and out, wasn't he?
Was he?
Yeah.
With the late works? Pardon me?
I don't think he was so much opposing that this is a piece where you should enter
No.
and leave it.
Well, he was tolerant of it.
He wasn't opposing it
No,
either.
I mean, he's human. He was human, So I think he was really interested in the idea of scale, though, and getting it
Yeah.
larger than
Yeah,
he's
that's-
experienced before. And I really think that
And in those large pieces, sorry.
you go longer, like what is long? And
Yeah.
when you ask the question, I was thinking, well, what does long mean? Like, how long is too long? Because, it's different for everybody, and partly, it's not ideal to listen to Tamlin when you've already been sitting for 2 hours.
Yes.
Well, I mean, that's a very
That's
practical
just
observation.
No,
fact.
it's dead right. Context is huge.
Hitchcock said the same about the length of his movies,
Yeah.
But I think the idea of making something that's longer than you can kind of hold on to is kind of hard. Like, at what point is it long enough to do that? And I think you did succeed, because I found it was even getting to that point where I couldn't really hold on to it. I was kind of trying to understand verse, singers, non-singers was was the only thing I was holding on to, really.
Yeah.
The rest was like, okay, now what? But that idea of scale is fascinating.
Yeah, and I mean, today, for instance, I guess I had thought of this before, but it was really striking me, like, what if a violinist who didn't use vibrato was playing it? And not as a better thing. I've been used to thinking vibrato bad. Becky uses a lot of classical vibrato, but today I was sort of liking it, because it had a whole other set of references from that instead of bugging me, were seeming kind of interesting. I mean, but it's a good, yeah, because for me, on the other hand, to actually be hearing it after being the one who was talking, I was digging it more than I have in years, because I was like, I'm not talking. Should I just play the whole thing? Then it'll be over. So it was a very different experience for me that way. But I can imagine. Yeah.
Well, the question certainly wasn't a criticism. I mean,
Oh no, I got no.
It's more curiosity.
How long something is something that does interest me a lot, though, too, because like in my courses, I usually start by playing James Brown's Super Bad, but that's the 10-minute studio one. I mean, it was a long song anyways from, I think the radio version was 6.5 minutes, but, and some people think, boy, that's really long, because it's just those random alternations of the bridge and all that.
Well,
I
can remember a point where when I got to the point of stopping listening to Late Coltrane halfway through a solo, I had to deal with my own kind of like moral choices or something like that. It's like, no, I'm allowed to do this if I'm kind of bored.
Yeah.
I can,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe it is that kind of sense of permission that I do like with length too. Like then though, the other thing that's funny with length, for instance, with all the things I brought in terms of popular music, I mean, you could tell my anxiety of wanting to get to the next cut, because then the other thing is to me Trout Mask Replica, like I tend to listen to it from beginning to end like quite a lot. It's just sort of like a long piece in a lot of different movements for me too, like just a heavily montaged sort of surrealist work. It's much rarer for me to just throw on, and I've been doing that more, just throwing on like the things that rock out, like Moonlight in Vermont and Ella Guru, and just going, hey, wait, these are great rock tunes. I can just do that, and that actually feels more radical to me now. But
I promise not to talk about your hands being too small.
oh yeah. Anything else? I'm gonna go for a beer at the Rhino, just so you know.